Good afternoon. Welcome. My name is Manish Wadhwa. I'm the founder of Humanity in Business. Thank you so much for joining us for the final episode of Leadership and Uncertainty. Today, we've got an awesome speaker, Gillian Coutts, who's from Potential Projects. Gillian was one of the speakers at our Mindful Leadership Conference that happened almost 2 years ago now. And she's a bit of a legend. She knows her content really well because she's one of the country directors, I think, in Australia for Potential Project. And really enjoyed her speaking at our event last time. And so we've invited her back again to talk about mind skills that we need to deal with uncertainty during these interesting times. Before we jump into Gillian, I'd just like to tell you about Humanity in Business. We've been around for 8 years, and I'm passionate about what great leadership looks like. All my events have been around leadership and what does it take to truly lead during times of uncertainty, which is really what our conversations are about in the last couple of events. The other partner I'm working with are Communiteer. Communiteer is a skill volunteering platform that enables organizations to measure the impact of the skill volunteering activities and to engage their community more effectively. So we're partnering together to deliver the show to you today. So I'd like to welcome Gillian. Gillian, thanks so much for joining us today. Really grateful for your time.
Thanks, Manish. Great to be here.
Awesome. Excellent. Glad to have you back. So Gillian, love to hear a bit more about your story. Tell us how you got here and about yourself a little bit, and then we can get into more details. So fire away.
Yeah, great, Manish. Thank you. So I'm going to be talking a bit about mind skills. But if you'd said to me 10 years ago that we would be having this conversation, I would have said, I can't imagine a universe that will deliver that. But my journey with really starting to think about my mind and the neuroscience and training the brain really started after the birth of my son. He's now, nearly 10, well, he's nearly 11. So just after he was born, I was diagnosed with breast cancer. So I kind of had 2 slaps to the head at the time. There was the slap of definitely becoming a parent, absolutely a slap, but then this second slap of having this disease that really kind of knocked me for a 6 at the time. Oh. And my answer to the kind of, I guess, the existential crisis that kind of emerged from that, like, what am I doing on this planet, actually told me that I should go back to work harder, get promoted faster, so I could create the human-centered organisation that was going to flourish in the world, you know. And at the time I was working for Pacific Brands, which is now called Hanes Brands, but you might know Bonds Undies or Sheridan Sheets and Towels. Sales and operations for one of the brands. And so I'm back at work. I've got this chemo brain up the wazoo. I've got a toddler under one arm, this big new job, and someone sort of helpfully said, "Oh, look, you seem a bit stressed out." I said, "Well, thank you." Have you ever thought of like mind training or looking after your brain, maybe meditating or something? I said, "Have you ever thought of sticking it up your jacksie?" Like, seriously,
that's gold.
I do not need in my life right now.
Wow.
But I was pretty desperate.
Right.
I was pretty desperate. So at the time, I started doing 10 minutes a day of a practice we might get to as part of this session. And it was interesting because after a couple of weeks, I started to feel more calm and in control, which was really, I hadn't felt that for a really long time.
Wow.
But then a couple of weeks later, my husband said to me, "Would you believe you're easier to live with?"
Wow.
And I thought, well, it's really funny because so are you. So while there was this experience that I felt more in control, apparently I was being less controlling, which was super helpful for my family, but absolutely essential for my team, right? So, wow. But the thing that really got me, I was really curious about this stuff, was a couple months down the track. So now I've been practicing for about 3 months, not perfectly, not every day, but most days. And I sit on a couple of boards. So after a board meeting, one of the guys leans over and says, "Oh, look, I don't know what's going on with you, but it's like you're suddenly smarter or something." I'm like, oh my God, I'm not sure that's a compliment, really. But it really got me thinking what was going on inside my brain, what was going on inside for me from a psychological perspective, what was going on from the way I showed up. That meant that I was being more effective, I think, and I was being more of what I wanted to be. So I started researching, what in the world was this? Who was doing this? Who was researching this? What was going on? So a long story short, we're now past that period, probably about 8 years down the track now. I've sort of got jettisoned out of sheets and towels and socks and jocks into the Potential Project, which is a global organisation. We consult for organisations around the world around training calmer, clearer minds, focused for leadership and performance and resilience. We've written a couple of books now. The latest, which we'll talk a little bit about, was with Harvard Business Review Press on the mind of the leader. So it's been a really interesting journey for me.
Yeah, I can imagine. I totally resonate with that, being slapped around a couple of times. I think it's the only way to learn is the hard way, right? It's almost like, if you don't get that slap, will anything change? Probably not. So I totally hear you on that one. So tell us a bit more about Potential Project, and tell us, I guess, what was some of the things that got you into this? You shared that, but more importantly, what are the mind skills that you're talking about? What exactly do you mean when you're saying mind skills?
Yeah, for sure. So it's been really interesting because the work we've done, with the mind of the leader, which is the work we've done with Harvard Business Review, we interviewed over 30, we assessed over 30,000 leaders and interviewed over 250 C-suite executives to really identify what were kind of the core mind skills for a 21st century leader. So not so much about strategy or kind of technical skills that you might need, but what were the mental skills that you need? And what was really interesting, what came up through the research, was 3 core skills: the capacity for mindfulness, or the ability to actually focus your attention on what you choose and choose what you move to next consciously. So what we're really talking about is mental agility. So that was the first foundational skill, this idea of mental agility, the ability to zoom out as you need to see the big picture, to see pattern, to then determine strategy, but also to zoom in so that you could determine what was the next key priority that was needed as you worked. The second skill was really this ability for compassion. And it's an interesting one because at the time, it didn't seem so obvious that compassion was needed, but we know now the amount of suffering that is occurring both within organisations but within society, within the way that so this ability to be able to turn our attention, our intention, to be of benefit to others. Like, there's never been a time when we've needed that more. But the third core skill that really arose from the research, which really surprised us, was this ability for selflessness. So this ability to transcend your own ego impulse. So this ability that when you're in a meeting and something suddenly happens that really irks you, the ability to, in a really wise, compassionate but selfless way, say, look, we're not on track, or this is not what we were expecting, in a really a way that really keeps you on track, but a way that doesn't mean that you have a big ego, and which means you end up having a big target on your back because people can push your buttons really easily. So it's being able to overcome those impulses.
Interesting. I'd love to hear a bit more about that. So in terms of, I guess, what we've been experiencing now with COVID, how did you handle the crisis? I mean, how did you respond when you first learned about this situation? What we had, like, what was your initial?
I think, like everybody, I first started with a bit of a wobble. I can remember, I think it must have been, I think it was even March 18th. I can remember the date. And I had, over that week, people had started to pull out of we did a lot of face-to-face delivery, and a lot of people had started to pull out of both things I was doing and things that we've got 18 trainers in Australia, so things that other trainers were doing. And we had this last client that I was delivering to on Wednesday morning, and they pulled out because they were a large travel coordinator, and it was in the middle of the press conference where Scott Morrison announced that the borders were shutting.
Wow.
And we're in this session together around the performance mindset. And they're like, "Oh, we've got to go. Like, we've got to go." I'm doing this because we were on Zoom, but we've got to go. And I'm like, that was the last, that was the one that cancelled out of the diary. And we suddenly had this moment. We went, we've got nothing. There is nothing.
Wow.
Nothing. And just in a personal sense, I'm the primary breadwinner of our family, so there was nothing coming up. And I did what all normal people did, and I actually got a migraine. And when I get migraines, I do them really well, so I end up vomiting, and then I go to hospital. So I was in hospital that night. The pure, like, a really strong reaction to this sudden, what are we going to do? Sorry, I even snorted then. It was so distressing. Wow. And but ironic about all of that was, so I'm over in hospital that night, and I had to deliver a session on resilience to the same travel provider on Friday. And I'm just lying in bed going, who am I to be talking about resilience? Like, this is a joke. And but what was interesting, and I think this is this zoom out, zoom in, this mental agility perspective. What I noticed, as soon as I noticed that I was starting to say, who are you to be talking about this? I could kind of see that thought arising. And then there was another thought, the compassionate thought that arose, and went, well, you know what? Going into that right now is actually not going to help you get any better. So what I noticed was I was actually able to recover a lot more quickly than I would normally. I say 10 years ago, I recovered a lot more quickly. So I was able to do the webinar on the Friday, and I even told the joke about how I'd been in hospital on the Wednesday night. And because we're human, right? Resilience isn't about your ability to never have a wobble. I think that's bollocks. I think if you didn't have a wobble right now, you'd probably be either in the very fortunate bubble that you've not had any impact, or maybe you're just not seeing the signs. So I think your resilience for me is really about your ability to recover as quickly as you can and to be of service in the greatest way that you can.
Yeah,
that was a really interesting
That's a powerful story. Thanks for sharing that, Gillian. I mean, the fact that you're as a thought leader yourself who's talking about this stuff to be impacted yourself and then pull yourself out of it, that's really powerful. Thanks. That's great. Thanks for sharing that. So I guess, what was your biggest learning then from that experience?
I think the kind of biggest thing that really struck me, I guess, as a leader, so both from the work we do in Potential Project, but also my role on the boards and things that I work on, really was this idea about when people feel helpless, how as a leader do you help them feel helpful? Like even in the very micro example, if I just share with you something that we did in our laneway, because on that, the Wednesday we'd had the webinar, we were doing the webinar that had fallen apart because of ScoMo's press conference. I've then had this empty diary, and I'm sitting on the Sunday of that week thinking, what about the people who don't have family? What about, as we all did, we all started to reach out and start to think about caring for others. And we had an app for our laneway. We've got about 120 houses on our lane, and just where I live. And one of the things that we'd done in the past was set up a WhatsApp group for the local families and people who lived here. But I knew that only really young families had joined the app. So on the Sunday, I was right, we're going to get these, we're going to get everybody on the app and we're going to all be connected. So I wrote up a little flyer and I'm like, right. And my normal way of being is to try and do everything for myself, because that way it gets done, right? So I know I've got this propensity to overdo. So I'm like, right, well, what if I just put out on the app and said, can someone help me deliver these flyers? Because 120 houses, that takes quite a while. Within 5 minutes, I had 6 families that had volunteered, come forward to flyers. And what was really precious about it, gives me goosebumps even as I think about it now. So I said, right, 5:30, we'll meet at the park, socially appropriately distanced, right, hand over the flyers. But you should have seen the looks on these people's faces as they walked towards me, and they had their kids with them, and they were really telling the story of why were they doing what they were doing? Why were they reaching out to help other people at this time? Why did it matter? And just the look on their faces and the experience of joy that I had in that moment of connection. And it really helped me see that as leaders, when we help people feel helpful, we can help people feel hopeful. So this real link between when we move from helpless to helpful, we help people move from hopeless to hopeful. And so it really started from both in the journey of the organisations I'm on the board with Uniting, both within Potential Project, around how can we help people help? Because if we can help people help, we will help people hope. And that, I think, was the big thing for me.
That's a great tagline. I love it. Help people is fantastic.
I know, isn't it?
It's really powerful. Awesome. So tell me, in terms of, I guess, the work you're now doing with leaders out there, what are you seeing? And how are they working through this and using your thought leadership, but also what have you seen the best leaders deal with the way they deal with uncertainty, and what are their strategies they're using to manage the current uncertainty levels?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the biggest thing we've noticed, first of all, is in a crisis, it's really easy for people to get really distracted. So for them to kind of jump all over the place, for your mind just to leap. And if you've, I imagine we've all been at some stages through this period in the panic zone. You know, that panic zone when it's not discomfort, it's not the nice, cushy, uncomfortable, but discomfort. It's panic. And when you panic, your brain tends to jump all over the place, and we're not in our best selves at all. So the best leaders I've seen have been able to respond to that by being able to go, right, how do I bring my focus back? How do I manage my attention now so that I can actually bring my focus to bear on what I choose? How do I calm my physiology so that I can do that in a really focused and attentive way? So that's the first thing. So that ability for the mental agility rather than true distraction. The second has been this ability to, I think a lot of organisations have had to make some really tough decisions. So this idea of empathy, and we've all talked about empathy being such a core business skill, right? Your ability to sense another person's pain. But what I've also seen is leaders get into real trouble because they've got stuck in what we call an empathy hijack. So we know that when we empathise with someone, what we do is we run their experience through our own pain networks of our brain to say, does this hurt? And the way we know if it hurts is if we hurt, right? So when we empathise with someone, what we're doing is feeling their pain. And so it makes it really hard to make rational decisions. When you're in that really emotional, empathic state, it's very hard to make decisions. There's a great author called Paul Bloom who's done a lot of research around rational empathy, which I think is a much more appropriate way to be, because what tends to happen is leaders then have these overwhelming experiences of empathy, and it's really uncomfortable. And so what they do in order to remove themselves from that is actually disconnect. And then they will make without any compassion, without any care for another person, because it hurts too much to care, right? And so one of the alternative skills that we've been seeing and really working with leaders on is this ability for wise compassion. So our ability to be both caring and wanting to be of benefit for others, but in a really wise way rather than a foolish way. So, I mean, a good example, one of our clients who had a whole lot of services that were suspended during the period. One of the leaders really almost became frozen, if you like, in this empathic hijack, like just couldn't make any decisions, couldn't even put pen to paper to communicate, or even fingers to keyboard, to communicate with her employees because it hurt too much.
Wow.
But that's not helpful to them. Like, they felt disconnected, but it also wasn't helpful for her. She wasn't sleeping. So this ability to identify, this ability to identify the very first moment when you experience suffering and you notice suffering, to be able to move into this state of wise compassion and connect with your own intention that you don't want another to suffer, and then you take action based on that. Right. So it's a much active state and intentional state rather than an emotional state, if that makes sense.
So you really have
to. That was the second.
Yeah, so you almost have to compartmentalize your empathy in some way to acknowledge it, to know that it exists, and at the same time then be able to move away from it to then act upon it. Is that what you're saying?
And rather than compartmentalize, although that could be the experience, it's like you label it.
Yeah, right.
And what we know from the is when you label something, you develop just a little bit more perspective. It's almost like that zooming out again that we talked about before. You're able to observe it and act on it rather than kind of, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so the observation of it, I guess, is my word of compartmentalizing it. But yes, so be able to acknowledge it in some way, that it does exist. And when you word it, then you're like, okay, I know that exists. Now what do I do next to then manage that?
Yeah, and it's interesting because we often talk about empathy, actually compassion fatigue is what they talk about in the caring professions.
Right.
And research points to actually is it isn't compassion fatigue, it's empathy fatigue. Like when we become exhausted from over-empathizing with people in our environment, running things through our own pain network, hurting too much. But when we move to compassion, actually, if you put yourself under an fMRI, or if you put someone under an fMRI scanner and scan them while they're experiencing compassion and connecting with that intention, what you notice is the areas associated with love and reward light up in their brain rather than the areas associated with the pain matrix, which is really interesting.
Yeah, right. So then, what I mean, you're very lucky to come across leaders who have a lot of empathy. I think the majority out there, unfortunately, could do with some more. Is my experience of speaking to some people I know in my network. So how do you, if you don't have that level of empathy and are slightly disconnected, I guess, with the team, is there any way to bring more of it in? I mean, more empathy in?
And I'm curious. I'm not sure that people don't have empathy. I think what's happened though is it's this experience of over empathizing that teaches people that it hurts, and therefore I'm better to disconnect. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
So it's like a really young time within our careers. I can remember starting. I worked at an oil firm as my first job, and it wasn't cool to show empathy. It wasn't cool to have emotions. I can remember emotions even being a bit of a taboo subject, right? This is 25 years ago. But so we're taught really early that it's better to disconnect. So I'm not sure that we don't have the skill, but my curiosity is that whether we know how to use it skillfully. So whether we're able to notice it and then be able to label it and then act with it rather than almost disconnecting, as you say. Because that's why I'm not quite a fan of compartmentalizing, because if you go like this, that's not helpful. But how can I know this, see it, and then act?
Okay. And so once the empathy piece, then what's the next piece that then follows in terms, or what's the other pillar of actually managing?
Yeah, absolutely. So we had mindful agility, and then we had the wise compassion. And the third part that we've really noticed being both a struggle and an opportunity for leaders at this time is in this need to pivot. And what we tend to do is, from an egoic perspective, hold on to what we've always done. Hold on to projects that we've already invested in. Hold on to things. It should be able to work like this. And we've found the leaders that have really done the best in this environment is to have this ability for selfless innovation, this ability to go, in this moment, what do I need to let go of about what's already happened in order to move forward? So, and interesting, I mean, this is not a recent case study, but a great story that makes me laugh is of the experience of Intel. And so when Intel, it was in the early 90s when the microprocessors they were moving to a new type of processor, and it was this ability to in that moment let go of all of what they needed to do to make that decision was let go of all the investment, all of the training, all of the market leadership they had in this previous form of technology. And so the sort of story goes, and I'm not sure if this is quite fact or legend, but this is what Intel tells about the story, is that they were sitting there trying to make a decision about this new processor. And they were kind of going, well, no, we should just keep doing what we've always done. And then one of the founder turned to the CEO at the time and said, look, if we were all sacked today and the new leadership team was coming in tomorrow, what decision would they make? And in that moment, they all went, you'd go for the future, surely. So it's this idea that we are always somehow invested. Our ego is invested in what's already been before. And how do you notice that? How do you label that? And then make decisions anyway. So the ability for selfless innovation has been really important during this time, I think, as well.
Yeah, that's a great word or phrase, selfless innovation. And I think that people are so obsessed with innovation, but the word selfless doesn't somehow come in there because they want to be the ones innovating. I innovated it, so I need my name attached to that. And it actually means that whatever I've created, I just got to let it go and not be attached to owning that anymore. But somebody else might come up with a better idea.
Exactly. And I think that idea of speed is really important at this time. So this, again, that idea of speed trumps perfection in a crisis. I think there's definitely that piece as well, because you're never going to have the data that you need. You don't know that it's going to work. I mean, a lot of I think the agile rules of, what's the minimum, experimental proposition, your minimal viable proposition that you can put forward test something, try it, go like that. And I know you've been doing that even in that time. Do you want to talk a little bit about your experience in that?
Yeah, just we've had to pivot our business as well from an events business to online. So literally, you just have to trial something and get feedback, like you said. And it's the principles of human-centered design. Everyone talks about human-centered design, which is iterate, test, iterate again, and get feedback. And that loop has to happen. That's the way everything has to work. And I'm doing that at the moment, and just create something, get feedback on it, and then see what happens, and then put it out there and just share it, and just say whoever wants to grab it and go with it, kind of thing. So I think one thing I've learned is to definitely let go of the ego, because it's not mine to own anymore. It's just like I'm creating it for the world. So if somebody can take it and run with it and collaborate and make it happen, it's actually much better way to go. So tell us what are some of the strategies? I know we covered a couple of key areas: the distractions, empathy, and ego. What are some of the strategies which you can use to actually shift and enable us to deal with uncertainty better? How does it actually work, and where have you seen it actually work?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think as a mind training company, clearly my response to that answer, that question is going to be, there's a bit of that's about training your mind. So your ability to be able to, in the moment that you need it, be able to focus your attention to what you choose. And so your ability to be able to zoom in as you see what are the priorities that need to happen, to zoom out as you need to see bigger pictures. And we often talk about getting on the balcony, which there's lots of different tools to do that. But how do you do it in the moment? How do you do it when you're in the moment of the situation to be able to have that broader perspective? And so part of the mind training, maybe we could do one now if you're up for it, is you're being able to train your mind to be able to do that is really powerful. I think that we start, I'll ask your permission.
Sure.
Are we okay to have a go?
Yeah, happy to.
Yeah. So what we're going to do is a practice called, known as an ABCD practice. So A for anatomy, B for breathing, C for counting, and D for distractions. And the basic structure of the practice is that you focus on your breath. So this is not going to be new to a lot of people, but it's basically focus on your breath. Your mind wanders, you notice that it's wandered, and you bring it back. But what happens as you do that practice, it sounds really simple, right? But it's not simplistic. So when we focus on the breath, what we're doing in that moment is activating the muscles or the neural pathways around choice, around presence, around being able to zoom in on what we choose, right? That's kind of that muscle. The second muscle we're developing as we do the practice, though, is this ability to zoom out. So when our mind wanders, it's not the mind wandering that's the zoom out, but it's the moment that we've noticed that it's wandered. We're activating that meta awareness, that meta capacity. That is your zooming out muscle. So when you do that, every time you notice that your mind's wandered, you are having a moment where you are stepping back on the balcony because you're noticing. And then the third muscle that you're developing as you do this practice is your ability to redirect, to reprioritize, to shift your focus, to be agile in what you pay attention to next. Right. So it's remembering that you've got to, and then activating that choice. And what's interesting is, and a lot of people have said to me, look, I just can't sleep at night at the moment. I wake up and I've got all of these thoughts and going on in my head, and I'm ruminating. And, lack of sleep is a death, right, for mental clarity. But if someone said to you at 3 o'clock in the morning, I'll let it go, just go back to sleep. You're like, I can't let it go. It's in my head. But what's interesting is the mental micro skill of letting it go isn't your ability to not think of pink elephants, right? It's not your ability to not think about because that's not possible. That's not possible. But it is your ability to choose where you redirect your attention. So you're exercising that mental agility to redirect your attention to where you choose. That's the power of letting go. Right. So we do like a 5-minute practice,
sure.
And then
happy to. Yep, give it a go.
Yeah, cool. So I'm going to keep my eye on the time.
Okay.
But I'm going to invite you, if you're comfortable, to close your eyes. That would be helpful because it'll just lose any distractions. But if you don't feel comfortable, just have them 45 degrees in front of you.
All good.
Just allowing your awareness now to descend into your body with the straight but relaxed spine. Taking a few deeper, longer breaths all the way in and all the way out. And again, all the way in and all the way out. And as you continue that longer, deeper breathing, just gently scanning your body on the in-breath for any areas of tension. And on the out-breath, relaxing and releasing whatever tension you find. And again, scanning on the in-breath, relaxing and releasing on the out-breath. And when you're as relaxed as you can be in this moment, just gently bring your attention to the physical sensations of breathing. And you can allow your attention to rest wherever they feel most strongly for you. It might be in the belly, the rise and fall of your abdomen. It might be at the tip of the nose. Or it might even be a sense of the whole body breathing. Just allow your attention to rest wherever those sensations are strongest for you. And knowing as we do this, what we're doing is strengthening the pathways, kind of mental muscles around focus, of zooming in, of paying attention where we choose. And if it helps, you might even like to start counting your breath at the end of each out breath. As you breathe in and breathe out, count 1. Breathe in and breathe out, count 2. Breathe in and breathe out, count 3. All the way up to the 10th breath. And then when you get to 10, just turn around and count back to 1 again in cycles. And at some point, your mind will wander, which is actually not a problem at all. In fact, you can be really pleased that you've noticed it. Because as you notice your mind wandering, that's that moment of meta awareness. That's that moment of getting on the mental balcony, of being an observer of what your mind's doing rather than stuck in the thinking. And in that moment, the instruction is simply to relax, to release or unhook from whatever it is that's captured your attention and redirect your focus back to the breath and this experience of breathing. And in that moment, you're practicing this ability from agility, the ability to choose what you pay attention to move from one thing to another. And again, noticing where your mind is. And if it's wandered away, it's not a problem. Again, it's that meta awareness muscle. And just relax. Unhook or release from whatever it is that's captured your attention. And gently, kindly redirect your attention back to the breath, the physical sensations of breathing. And in the final moments of the practice, just taking a moment to check in with your greater self for any greater sense of calm or ease or capacity to focus. And when you're ready, taking 3 deeper, longer breaths again, all the way in and all the way out. And again, all the way in and all the way out. After this final breath, bring your attention back to the room.
Yeah, wow. That's awesome. So what I really noticed is the piece around being able to, as the gap between my mind wandering increased. So I was being able to have less and less mind wandering away as time progressed. Became more aware of that moving away, as bringing back. So I became more aware of it. Therefore, I was able to focus on my breath a bit longer. Does that make sense?
Beautiful. Yeah, beautiful. And so hearing that, Manish, as well, is that you're getting up on the mental balcony more quickly
Yes.
as you that it's wandering,
Yes.
and then you bring it back. I mean, some piece of research say we have 70,000 thoughts a day. Like your mind is going to wander,
Correct.
but it's our notice that that's happening, and then notice the quality. Like, so again, from a leadership perspective, these skills are, as you develop that mental balcony, if you like, the mental awareness. What you do is you then be able to notice the quality. Is this thought helpful to me? Like, is this 27th time I've thought about the fact that I don't have enough work coming in, or I don't know how to respond to this situation, or I don't know what's going to happen next week, or I don't know what to tell my team. If that's the 27th time you're ruminating about that, not so helpful.
Yeah.
So redirect your attention to what you choose. And in the practice, we choose the breath, but in day-to-day life, you choose whatever else that's going to be helpful to you in that moment.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest challenges I struggle with is also the rumination piece, and I know several people who do. It's almost like, you have to have a conversation about something. You keep thinking about having that conversation. I'm about to talk about that, and it just keeps coming back, right? So, like you're saying, if you're enabled to actually separate myself from that and bring more awareness to that constant thought process, then I can actually let it go and detach from it.
And to have some compassion for yourself. I think
got it.
I had an example, a couple of weeks ago where in a board meeting, I said something that was a bit controversial. And so in that moment, I don't know if you've ever had this experience, you say it, and then all of a sudden you feel sick because it's like, oh, I shouldn't have said that. How's everyone else? We're all on Zoom. I can't really tell how other people are reacting. And I felt after the board meeting, like it was a really important thing that had to be said, right? So I don't back away from the fact that I said it, but I still felt really uncomfortable about it. And I had like a sick feeling in the bottom of my stomach. And I noticed as I went for a walk after the board meeting that I felt like I needed to ring people and say, look, do you think that sounded okay? Do you still like me? All of that sort of stuff that goes through your head, right? And what I noticed was my ability to then notice that and go, wow, that is just the experience of feeling vulnerable. That's feeling vulnerable in my tummy right there.
Right.
I've said something. I'm actually, you could also label it courage. You could also label it, ferocious compassion, whatever. Like there's a whole lot of labels that I could put on it. But in that moment, I was feeling pretty sick and like I needed someone to say, that's okay, Jill, you did a good job. That's what I really needed.
Yeah.
But what I was able to do when I went for the walk was go, wow, that feeling's there. Breathe. It's okay. I'm not going to do anything about this because if I go and caucus with anybody right now, I'm actually undermining the position that I've taken, and I believe in the position I've taken. So I'm going to redirect my attention to what I choose. And in that moment, the only thing I could think of choosing was my feet on the ground. So I just focused on my feet on the ground, and then the feeling goes away. And of course, then it comes back again. So I kept focusing on my feet on the ground. But the less oxygen you give a thought, the sooner it moves away. Right. So that, these thoughts have that feeling of vulnerability. Yeah, that's a bit of a pattern for me. I'm used to feeling a bit like that if I say something that I feel uncomfortable about. Um, and and so they become mental habits. So the rumination kicks in. So your ability to move away from that is really powerful. But it starts, as you just said, your ability to notice it is the most powerful thing, because then you've got choice.
Yes, agreed. And I think one of the things which, for me, the great leadership I've seen that are able to do is actually do those difficult conversations that are challenging. And leadership is about the hard conversations, right? Not the easy ones. Everyone can have the easy conversations, but how do you actually have the hard ones? And I think that feeling which you talked about is actually probably where, in my experience, where growth actually happens as my on my leadership. The more I can have the stuff that makes me feel uncomfortable, the better a leader I've actually managed to become, because I've managed to get over that feeling easier next time, and it becomes easier as I do it, because it builds that muscle, like you mentioned earlier.
Yeah. And I think another really useful frame and sort of practice and mental training around that is often the difficult conversations we have to have involve people. And often those situations are difficult because we don't want to hurt someone, or we don't want to have conflict, because that will be uncomfortable. And so one thing to really play with is this idea of intention. What's my intention in this difficult conversation, and how can I frame it so that it's a benefit to the other person? It doesn't mean that you're a doormat. It doesn't mean that you go into that kind of foolish compassion that we'd say, which is you just allow yourself to be walked over. But how do I frame this? What is it about this situation that is also going to be of benefit to the other person? So if it's a difficult conversation about someone's poor performance, or a really challenging decision you've got to make about restructure or something like that.
Yes.
Given the pain that's there, what is my intention, and how do I always come at this from a kind perspective? And that can be hard, right? Particularly if someone's really peed you off. How do I come at this though from a kind perspective so that I am of benefit to this other person?
Yeah, and that's
so they may the blind spot or whatever it is. Sorry.
Yeah, tough one. No, you're right, spot on. I think that the tough one is the kind bit, in spite of you knowing that there's a disconnect in terms of the relationship. It's a hard one to do. I'm conscious of time. We've got around 15 minutes or so. Do you want to jump into the other piece? I think the next one we're talking about, is it the empathy or the ego, or in terms of going to more detail?
I think one of the things that what we might do, Manish, is just at the end jump to the challenge slide, and then that might be the only one that we use.
Okay.
But the one of the things that I also found really important during this time, and I'm curious how many of the viewers really relate to this, is this idea of, do you in a situation do you kind of freeze and turn away, or do you lean in and engage? And one of the experiences I know I had at the start, one of the boards I sit on is a healthcare board, it's a hospital. And so, the reality was we didn't have enough PPE, we didn't have enough protective equipment to support people if we had an outbreak.
Wow.
Like we just didn't have enough.
Right.
And know that you're going to put people's lives at risk if something happens is really kind of sobering at the time. But what was interesting was we had a board meeting coming up, and I noticed that I didn't want to read my board papers. I didn't want to engage in this. I know this sounds really unprofessional, but in that moment, I was frozen. I was overwhelmed. I felt like, who am I? The things that I do, I've not run a hospital before. I don't know the operational detail of a hospital. I don't sit on the board for that reason. I sit on for different governance and cultural reasons. But I found myself just wanting to go, like, really frozen, really can't engage. You don't know what. No. So I just didn't read my board papers. I was listening to, I don't know if you've come across the work of Otto Scharmer and Theory U.
Yep.
He has amazing kind of systems approach.
Yep.
And one of the articles I read during that really crunchy part of March was, he said, you've got two choices. You can freeze and turn away, or he might even say turn away and freeze, if that makes more sense. He said, or you can engage and lean in. And I it was really interesting because I heard that and went, oh, that's what I'm doing. I'm freezing. And then so I turned up the meeting, and I still felt my I still didn't know what I was going to add. Like, this is a really technical operational meeting about COVID response planning. This was really technical and kind of very high order governance, I was fine with that, but the technical stuff was over my head. Anyway, we get through the meeting. At one point, the CEO starts crying.
Oh, wow.
Because of this, people, because of the enormity of the challenge that was potentially ahead. And it was really interesting because at that time she said, look, I'm really sorry. And she kept apologizing to the board saying, I'm really sorry, I broke down, that was inappropriate, I'm fine. So she kept kind of like, I'm fine. And it was inappropriate and I broke down. And we got to the end of the meeting and I suddenly felt compelled to say something. And those moments when you're not entirely sure what's going to come out of your mouth, but you have to say something. So in that moment, I said, look, I think we really need to reframe what's happened in this meeting. You talk about breaking down. I didn't see breaking down. What I saw is stepping up.
Yeah, well.
What I saw is stepping up to the challenge. What I saw is stepping up to the responsibility. What I saw is stepping up to the uncertainty of what we're all facing here. So I don't think those are tears of breaking down. I think there's tears of stepping up.
Yeah, brilliant.
And it was like, and she came back to me afterwards and said, oh, that was what we really needed to hear. And I'm like, wow, okay, so even though I had no idea what I was going to be able to contribute, no idea what turning in and engaging was going to bring, I brought something.
Yeah, right.
What I said was in that moment. And other people could have said it for sure, but I said it in that moment.
Yeah.
And you don't always know what's going to be the role you're going to play or the skill you're going to bring in that moment. And if you turn away and freeze, you'll never know.
Yeah, I think that piece around uncomfortableness, what you said around, do I run away, freeze, or engage? I think that in itself probably is the sign that I am freezing here. So that's probably the sign that I actually need to be doing something rather than turning away. I think for myself, that's been the case where the fears come up about doing something then I thought about it, shit, that's exactly what I need to do, not step away. And it's counterintuitive.
And it's uncomfortable, right? So having some compassion for yourself, that's why these things kind of build into each other. You can notice it, you can label it, and you can go, wow, look at that, I'm turning away. This hurts. This is uncomfortable. And I'm going to lead in anyway. Like, that's what courage is, doing that even though it's hard. I think, so there's some real power in that. And the selflessness of not having to have all the answers. Being able to ask the questions, being curious, wanting to engage, even though you don't know the answer.
Yeah, I hear you.
And that might be fun.
And is there any other story which you can share that in your experience that you've seen leaders do this stuff really well? I know you work with multiple companies across the board, not necessarily now, but in the past. That's a great example, by the way, a CEO shedding tears on a board meeting that doesn't happen. So. Yeah. Is there any others before we wrap up?
Yeah, I think that the one that's happened during this time that really stands out to me, because there's been a lot of difficult decisions people have had to make, and I think we'll see more difficult decisions coming up in terms of layoffs and things like that. And one of this, not someone I worked with personally, but it was I'm not sure if you came across the Airbnb CEO's email that he sent at the time of the layoffs that they did. And there was something that was really compelling. It wasn't perfect email, but it was really compelling in terms of the evidence of care. And so this messaging that we have of care for people in the way we lead at all times is really important. So I think like a counter example, I think even, and I'm not wanting to get too political, but at times during this Australian crisis, through the bushfires and then through COVID, we've had some of our leaders come out and say, you shouldn't be, hoarding toilet paper. It's un-Australian. And that's, you're being shamed. You're being shamed for a really natural response, which is, I'm fearful. I don't know what's happening. I'm going to go and do the only thing I can control, which is to fill my pantry. If I've got the money to be able to do that right now, I'm going to do that, right? And so we're shaming people for feeling fear and trying to take control. A different way of leading it, which I've seen very much evidenced more on the other side of the pond over in New Zealand, is very much around, for all of you who are feeling like you really need to go out and buy everything so that you're going to be safe during this time, that you've got enough of what you need, really understand where you're coming from, really understand that fear, and let me give you faith that you will not run out, that we will not run out. We will not let people go without during this time. And so this ability to name the human feeling, embrace it, and help people move beyond it. I think that is so important during this time, that ability to really not turn away, not to shame, not to other, not to make people wrong, but to really lean in.
That's gold. And I don't know how often that happens in any, most leadership, particularly in the politics environment that we have to play. And it does take a tremendous amount of skill to do that. And to actually acknowledge what people are going through. I think that's very rarely done, and it's truly an important leadership trait. So thanks for making that clear to us. Do you want to tell us a bit more about the 21-day challenge that you're thinking of?
21-day challenge kicking off July 1st. So if you're up for the challenge, I'm hoping that you'll be able to see in the chat box there our email address, gillian.coutts@potentialproject.com. If you reach out, we'll be able to join you into the challenge, or reach out on LinkedIn. We'll be kicking that off from July 1st, and we'll be able to give you a free app and also the support that goes along with that challenge over the first 21 days of July. But we'll be really focused on helping people develop those muscles of mental agility, the practice that we did earlier, and the invitation to do that for 10 minutes a day along with the app, and to engage in the community for that kind of accountability partner as we do this challenge together.
And are you going to be launching that on LinkedIn and out there and getting your community involved? Yeah. Okay. So definitely tag us in there and on social, so that we can spread the word and get you guys involved. Any final closing remarks around this stuff? If there's one thing that people really need to do to ensure that they have the right mindset, what would that one thing be?
Wow. I would say breathe. It's a very basic thing, but we know that the parasympathetic nervous system, our ability to rest and digest, is really activated on a long, deep out breath, that real sigh.
Right.
If you find getting into sort of heightened states of anxiety or concern, and you've got to take, I guess, leadership steps to take control, then a long, deep out breath, if that's all you've got time for, do that regularly through the day, and you will be in a much better position.
Yeah, great. Yeah, lots of breathing, and it's so simple, isn't it? It's like, how hard is breathing? And the more we can breathe. Sorry?
We forget to do it.
We forget to do it.
We breathe all the time. Yeah.
To really breathe, we forget how to do it. I totally agree. It's so easy, but yet so hard to do. Right? Awesome. Well, just checking in if there's any questions, guys, just before we wrap up. Please drop a note on the chat. But in the meantime, I think I'd like to thank you, Gillian. I think it's been really great having a chat. This stuff is, as you know, I'm really passionate about. So I'm glad you shared your perspective with us again. And thank you all for joining us online today. I'm really grateful for your time. And I know hopefully you found some value there around the importance of breathing, as well as the other stuff which we talked about. I think that's been some great stories that Gillian managed to share with us, particularly your own story, Gillian. Thanks for sharing that. It was really powerful as well. In terms of what you had to go through. So thank you all again. We will be recorded all these sessions, and it will be available online and on LinkedIn. So please keep a lookout of the other 7 series as well. I really appreciate you giving us your time, and have an awesome day and have an awesome week. And Gillian, thanks again for joining us, and I'll speak to you soon. All right, take care.
On you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.